The Cessna 172 bounced violently through turbulence at 4,500 feet as civilian flight instructor Valentina Santos demonstrated emergency procedures to her nervous student pilot, her hands steady on the controls despite conditions that should have sent them immediately back to the airport. Below them, Riverside Municipal Airport looked impossibly small through the storm clouds that had developed with frightening speed over Southern California, turning what should have been routine flight training into a survival exercise that tested every limit of both aircraft performance and pilot skill. While her terrified student gripped the seat and questioned the wisdom of continuing the lesson, Valentina maneuvered the small training aircraft with precision that defied both the weather conditions and the limitations of civilian flight instruction. What the shaking student didn't know was that the calm woman beside him had once engaged enemy fighters in aerial combat over hostile territory, her trigger finger responsible for 47 confirmed air-to-air kills that made her the most lethal pilot in modern Air Force history. Welcome to Those Who Left a Trace, where we uncover the extraordinary stories of people whose greatest achievements remain hidden behind ordinary careers. Before we dive into this incredible tale of skill disguised as simplicity, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that some legends choose to teach rather than boast, hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytellers. The morning briefing at Riverside Flight Academy had been routine until weather conditions deteriorated with the kind of sudden intensity that Southern California was notorious for during late spring. Chief Flight Instructor Valentina Santos sat in the operations office reviewing student training schedules while monitoring meteorological reports that showed rapidly developing thunderstorm activity across the Inland Empire region. At 36 years old, she possessed 9 years of civilian flight instruction experience that had earned her a reputation as one of the most skilled and patient teachers in the regional aviation community. Looks like we're going to have to cancel most afternoon flights, observed Jake Morrison, a former airline pilot who had joined the flight school after early retirement from commercial aviation. Weather Service is showing cells developing to 25,000 feet with wind shear that could challenge even experienced pilots. Valentina studied the radar imagery with analytical precision that her colleagues attributed to exceptional meteorological training and natural aptitude for flight instruction. Her assessment of weather patterns, risk factors, and training opportunities reflected experience that went far beyond civilian pilot education, though she rarely discussed her background with instructors who assumed she had followed the traditional path from private pilot certificate to commercial flight instruction. "We'll evaluate conditions on a case-by-case basis," she replied with professional calm that had characterized her teaching throughout her civilian aviation career. Some students need exposure to challenging conditions as part of their training progression, but safety remains the primary consideration. The statement reflected standard flight training philosophy, though something in Valentina's tone suggested familiarity with operations where mission completion had required accepting weather risks that civilian aviation normally avoided. "Valentina," called Sarah Chun, the flight school's chief administrative officer, "your 1,400 hours student just arrived for his cross-country training flight." Tommy Rodriguez, working toward his private pilot certificate. "Are you planning to fly in these conditions?" Valentina glanced at the weather radar display showing storm cells that were developing rapidly across their planned training route. Most civilian flight instructors would have automatically canceled such a lesson, but she recognized an opportunity to provide real-world training that would benefit her students' development as a pilot. "I'll brief Tommy on the conditions and let him make the go/no-go decision based on his comfort level and the training value of the experience." Her approach to flight instruction emphasized decision-making skills and weather judgment that prepared students for the kind of challenging conditions they would inevitably encounter during their aviation careers. However, her confidence in adverse weather operations reflected experience that went far beyond civilian flight training. 22-year-old Tommy Rodriguez arrived at the flight school with the nervous energy that marked student pilots approaching solo cross-country flights, the milestone that would demonstrate their ability to navigate and manage aircraft independently across significant distances. "Good afternoon, Tommy." Valentina greeted her student with the encouraging manner that had made her popular among flight school clients. I've been monitoring weather conditions for our planned cross-country flight to San Diego. We have some interesting meteorological activity developing that could provide valuable training experience. Tommy studied the weather displays with the uncertainty that characterized relatively inexperienced pilots facing conditions beyond their previous training. Ms. Santos, those storm clouds look pretty intense. Are you sure it's safe to fly today? Tommy, weather evaluation is one of the most important skills you'll develop as a pilot. Let's review the conditions together and determine whether this flight provides beneficial training or exceeds safe operational limits. For the next 30 minutes, Valentina conducted the most comprehensive weather briefing Tommy had ever received, analyzing meteorological data with expertise that impressed even the experienced pilots observing from nearby. Her explanation of weather patterns, aircraft performance limitations, and risk management demonstrated knowledge that went beyond typical flight instructor qualifications. Based on current conditions and forecast development, we can conduct a modified cross-country flight that provides exposure to real-world weather while maintaining adequate safety margins, she concluded. However, the decision to fly remains yours, and there's no pressure to accept conditions that exceed your comfort level. Tommy considered the briefing, recognizing that Valentina's analysis had given him confidence in both the mission planning and her ability to manage challenging conditions safely. Ms. Santos, I trust your judgment. If you think this flight will help my training, I'm ready to go. Excellent. Let's conduct pre-flight planning for a route that avoids the most severe weather while providing meaningful experience with meteorological decision-making. As they prepared Cessna 172 tail number and 847VS for departure, Valentina's pre-flight inspection demonstrated thoroughness that exceeded standard civilian procedures. Her examination of control surfaces, engine components, and avionics systems reflected familiarity with aircraft systems that suggested training beyond typical. Flight instructor preparation. Tommy, what's your assessment of our aircraft capability in the forecasted conditions? Tommy consulted performance charts and weather data with the methodical approach that Valentina had taught him during previous lessons. Based on aircraft limitations and pilot experience, we can safely operate in current conditions with planned route modifications to avoid areas of severe turbulence. Good analysis. Remember that aircraft capability and pilot capability must both be considered when making go/no-go decisions. Never let the performance of the aircraft exceed your ability to control it safely. The advice reflected standard flight training wisdom, though something in Valentina's delivery suggested personal experience with situations where aircraft performance and pilot skill had been tested under demanding conditions. Riverside Tower, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, requesting taxi for departure with student pilot cross-country flight to the southwest. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, taxi to runway 26, wind 240 at 18 gusting 28, altimeter 29.92. Be advised, aircraft are reporting moderate to severe turbulence below 6,000 feet. Roger. Taxi runway 26, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. As they taxied toward the active runway, Tommy observed the wind conditions that were causing other aircraft to remain tied down rather than attempt flight operations. Ms. Santos, are you sure about taking off in these winds? Tommy, crosswind operations are an essential skill for any pilot. Today's conditions provide excellent training for techniques you'll need throughout your aviation career. Valentina's confidence in challenging weather operations had impressed students throughout her civilian teaching career, though none suspected that her expertise had been developed during military service involving aircraft operations under combat conditions, where weather was merely one of many threats to mission success. Riverside Tower, Cessna 847 Victor, Sierra ready for departure. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, clear for takeoff runway 26. Fly heading 240. Contact departure control on 124.9. The takeoff roll demonstrated flying technique that impressed Tommy despite his limited experience recognizing exceptional pilot skill. Valentina's control inputs during the crosswind departure were smooth and precise, managing the aircraft's response to gusting conditions with expertise that made difficult flying appear routine. Departure control, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra with you at 1,500 feet. Climbing to 4,500. Student pilot cross-country flight. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. Radar contact. Climb and maintain 4,500 feet. Squawk 4327. Be advised, aircraft are reporting moderate turbulence ahead. Pilot discretion for route deviations. Roger. 4,500 feet. Squawk 4327. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. As they climbed through turbulence that challenged the small aircraft's structural limits, Tommy watched Valentina manage the flight with calm efficiency that impressed him despite the uncomfortable conditions. Ms. Santos, how do you stay so calm in conditions like this? Tommy, turbulence is uncomfortable but rarely dangerous in properly maintained aircraft. The key is maintaining positive aircraft control and not allowing rough air to influence your decision-making. Her explanation reflected experience with aircraft operations under conditions far more challenging than civilian flight training typically encountered. However, something in her technique for managing severe turbulence suggested familiarity with high-performance aircraft operations beyond Cessna 172 capabilities. At 4,500 feet, they encountered wind shear that threatened to overwhelm the training aircraft performance envelope, requiring immediate pilot intervention to maintain control flight. Tommy, I'm taking controls, Valentina announced while smoothly assuming command of the aircraft. Observe the technique for managing wind shear in light aircraft. Her response to the emergency was immediate and professional, demonstrating flying skills that went far beyond typical civilian pilot capabilities. Tommy watched in amazement as she maneuvered the Cessna through conditions that should have been overwhelming for such a small aircraft. Ms. Santos, how did you learn to fly like that? That was incredible. Experience, Tommy. Exposure to challenging conditions builds skills that can't be learned from textbooks. The modest deflection was characteristic of Valentina's response to recognition of her flying abilities, though Tommy had begun to suspect that her experience included training that went beyond civilian flight instruction programs. Departure control, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, requesting vector around weather cells to the southwest. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, turn left heading 180, vector around precipitation. Advise when ready to resume course. As they navigate around thunderstorm cells that towered above their altitude capability, Valentina's route planning and weather avoidance demonstrated expertise that impressed even the air traffic controllers managing their flight. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra, good job on that weather avoidance. Most light aircraft pilots wouldn't have attempted flight in today's conditions. Thank you, departure. We're conducting advanced weather training with an experienced student. The exchange reflected confidence in challenging conditions that had characterized Valentina's teaching throughout her civilian career, though her technique for weather penetration suggested training with high-performance aircraft capable of operations that exceeded civilian aviation capabilities. For the next 2 hours, they conducted a modified cross-country flight that provided Tommy with exposure to real-world aviation challenges while maintaining safety margins that reflected Valentina's exceptional judgment and flying skills. Ms. Santos, this has been the most educational flight of my training, Tommy observed as they prepared for return to Riverside Municipal Airport. Your ability to handle these conditions while teaching is remarkable. Thank you, Tommy. The goal is always to expand your capabilities while maintaining safety as a primary consideration. As they approached Riverside for landing, weather conditions had continued to deteriorate, with crosswinds that exceeded the demonstrated capability of most student pilots in light aircraft. Tommy, I'm going to demonstrate a crosswind landing technique that will help you handle challenging wind conditions safely. Valentina's approach to runway 26 showcased flying skills that were far beyond typical civilian flight instructor capabilities. Her management of wind correction angles, touchdown technique, and directional control during rollout demonstrated training that could only have been acquired through extensive experience with high-performance aircraft operations. Riverside Tower, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. Full stop landing. Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. Clear to land runway 26. Wind 250 at 25 gusting 35. Caution wake turbulence. Business jet departing. The landing was flawless despite wind conditions that would have challenged experienced commercial pilots, with Valentina demonstrating technique that impressed the tower controllers monitoring their approach. Nice landing, Cessna 847 Victor Sierra. Most pilots wouldn't have attempted that approach in these conditions. Thank you, tower. Good training opportunity for advanced techniques. As they taxied back to the flight school ramp, Tommy reflected on the most challenging and educational flight of his training experience. Ms. Santos, I have to ask, where did you learn to fly like that? Your skills seem to go far beyond civilian flight instruction. Tommy, I have diverse aviation background that includes various types of training. Today, we applied that experience to advance your development as a pilot. The deflection was typical of Valentina's reluctance to discuss her background, though Tommy had observed flying capabilities that suggested training beyond civilian aviation programs. Their return to the flight school coincided with the arrival of an unexpected visitor that would change everything about Valentina's carefully maintained civilian identity. "Excuse me, I'm looking for flight instructor Valentina Santos," said a man in Air Force dress blues whose ribbons and insignia indicated senior officer rank and extensive combat experience. "I'm Valentina Santos. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, I'm Colonel Marcus Viper Thompson for 112th Test Wing at Edwards Air Force Base. I need to speak with you privately about a matter of mutual interest." Valentina felt her civilian identity beginning to crack as she recognized the implications of a senior Air Force officer seeking her out at a civilian flight school. "Colonel Thompson, I'm not sure what Air Force business would involve civilian flight instruction." "Ma'am, it involves your previous Air Force service and capabilities that have come to our attention through various channels." Tommy and other flight school personnel observed the exchange with growing curiosity about why military personnel would be interested in their civilian flight instructor. "Colonel, perhaps we could continue this discussion in private." "Of course, ma'am. Is there somewhere we can speak confidentially?" Valentina led Colonel Thompson to the flight school's conference room while Tommy and other instructors speculated about the unexpected military interest in their colleague. "Ms. Santos, I'll be direct. We've been monitoring civilian aviation activities and have identified flying capabilities that suggest military training beyond what appears in public records." "Colonel Thompson, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I'm a civilian flight instructor with appropriate certifications for my current position." "Ma'am, with respect, what we've observed through various sources indicates flying skills that exceed civilian training programs. Specifically, your weather penetration techniques and aircraft handling suggest fighter pilot training." The direct assessment sent shock waves through Valentina as she realized that her civilian flying had revealed capabilities that could only be explained by military fighter pilot experience. "Colonel, what exactly are you suggesting?" "Ma'am, I'm suggesting that you possess fighter pilot training and experience that has been concealed for reasons that may relate to classified operations or personal choice." Valentina considered her options, understanding that continued deception would become increasingly difficult as Colonel Thompson's investigation progressed. "Colonel Thompson, assuming your assessment is accurate, what would be the implications for my civilian career?" "Ma'am, there would be no negative implications. However, the Air Force is interested in discussing your potential contribution to advanced pilot training programs that could benefit from your unique experience." The conversation was interrupted by commotion from the flight school lobby, where Tommy and other instructors were engaged in animated discussion about their instructor's mysterious military visitor. "Colonel, I think this conversation is attracting attention that I prefer to avoid." "Understood, ma'am. Perhaps we could continue this discussion at a more private location." As they prepared to leave the conference room, Jake Morrison approached with curiosity that had been building since Colonel Thompson's arrival. "Valentina, is everything okay? Military officers don't usually visit civilian flight schools unless something significant is happening." "Jake, it's just routine military liaison. Nothing that affects flight school operations. Morrison's expression suggested skepticism about the official explanation, particularly given the extended private discussion between Valentina and the senior Air Force officer. Colonel Thompson, thank you for the discussion. I'll consider the matters we've covered and contact you with any questions. Ma'am, here's my contact information. I hope we can continue our conversation soon. As Colonel Thompson departed, the flight school staff gathered around Valentina with questions about the unexpected military interest in their civilian instructor. Valentina, what did that Air Force colonel want? Asked Sarah Chun. It's unusual for military personnel to seek out civilian flight instructors. Sarah, it was routine military liaison regarding civilian aviation training programs. Nothing that affects our operations here. The explanation was technically accurate, but insufficient to satisfy the curiosity of colleagues who had observed an extended private discussion with a senior military officer. Valentina, Tommy said quietly, after the fly I observed today and now this military visit, I'm beginning to suspect there's more to your background than civilian flight instruction. Tommy, my background includes various aviation experiences that contribute to my effectiveness as a flight instructor. Today we focus on advancing your training, which is what matters most. Over the next 3 days, speculation about Valentina's military background continued among flight school staff and students who had observed both her exceptional flying capabilities and the unexpected Air Force interest in her activities. The situation reached a turning point when Tommy arrived for his next lesson, carrying a tablet displaying news coverage that would end Valentina's carefully maintained civilian anonymity. Ms. Santos, I think you need to see this, Tommy said, showing her an article from Air Force Times with a headline that made her blood run cold. Legendary fighter pilot Phoenix reported teaching at civilian flight school. Valentina read the article with growing resignation as she realized that her military identity had been discovered and publicized despite her efforts to maintain separation between her combat experience and civilian aviation career. Tommy, where did this information come from? The article says that military aviation enthusiasts identified flying techniques at civilian airports that matched the signature style of a legendary fighter pilot who disappeared from public view several years ago. The revelation meant that her cover was blown beyond any possibility of repair, forcing her to confront the reality that her military reputation had followed her into civilian aviation. Ms. Santos, the article says that Phoenix was credited with 47 air-to-air combat victories, making her the most successful fighter pilot in modern Air Force history. Is this really you? Valentina looked at Tommy with the expression of someone whose carefully constructed new life had just collapsed around her. Tommy, my name is Colonel Valentina Phoenix Santos, former F-16 Fighting Falcon pilot with the 57th Wing at Nellis Air Force Base. I served 3 combat deployments and achieved 47 confirmed air-to-air kills before retiring from active duty. The confession sent shockwaves through the flight school as other instructors and students gathered to hear confirmation of what had been growing speculation since Colonel Thompson's visit. 47 air-to-air kills, Morrison repeated in amazement. Valentina, that makes you the most successful American fighter pilot since World War II. Jake, that's correct. But I retired from military service to pursue civilian aviation because I wanted to contribute to general aviation rather than continue combat operations. Colonel Santos, Sarah Chin said with obvious respect, why didn't you ever mention your military background? Your achievements would have been incredible marketing for our flight school. Sarah, I wanted to be evaluated as a civilian flight instructor based on my teaching abilities rather than military reputation. Student development should be the focus, not instructor credentials. Tommy stared at Valentina with new understanding of the exceptional instruction he had been receiving from one of history's most accomplished fighter pilots. Ms. Santos, Colonel Santos, no wonder your flying seems so far beyond normal civilian instruction. You've been teaching me techniques developed in actual air-to-air combat. Tommy, good flying is good flying, whether you're engaging enemy fighters or teaching students to manage crosswinds. The principles of aircraft control and situational awareness apply to all aviation operations. As word of Valentina's true identity spread throughout the regional aviation community, she received an unexpected phone call that would formalize a connection between her combat experience and civilian flight instruction. Colonel Santos, this is General Patricia Williams, Commander Air Education and Training Command. I've been following the recent publicity regarding your civilian flight instruction activities. Yes, General. How can I help you? Colonel, the Air Force is developing advanced pilot training programs that integrate civilian and military aviation techniques. Your unique experience makes you an ideal candidate to lead that development. Valentina considered the offer while watching flight school aircraft conducting routine training operations that represented the civilian aviation career she had built after leaving combat operations. General, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm committed to civilian flight instruction. These students need quality training that prepares them for careers in general aviation. Colonel, we're not asking you to abandon civilian instruction. We're proposing a program that would allow you to contribute to military training while continuing your civilian teaching. What type of program, General? Integration training that teaches military pilots civilian aviation techniques while helping civilian instructors understand military flight procedures. Your experience bridging both communities makes you uniquely qualified. The proposal represented an opportunity to use her complete aviation experience in ways that could benefit both military and civilian pilots who needed comprehensive training for their respective career paths. General, I would be interested in consultation that supports both military and civilian aviation training while allowing me to continue flight instruction. 6 months later, Valentina had established a training program that taught civilian pilots military precision flying techniques while helping military aviators understand the specialized requirements of civilian aviation operations. Her revelation as Phoenix had created opportunities to improve flight training for both communities. Colonel Santos, said Colonel Thompson during one of her training sessions at Edwards Air Force Base, the integration program you developed has revolutionized our approach to pilot training. Combining military and civilian techniques has improved capabilities across both communities. Colonel Thompson, precision flying and good decision-making are universal aviation requirements. When we combine the best techniques from military and civilian training, everyone benefits. Tommy Rodriguez had completed his private pilot certificate and continued advanced training under Valentina's instruction, benefiting from exposure to flying techniques that few civilian students ever encountered. Colonel Santos, knowing your background explains everything about the exceptional training I've received. Your combat experience translated into civilian instruction that far exceeded anything I could have gotten elsewhere. Tommy, my goal was always to prepare you for safe and competent flying throughout your aviation career. Whether that experience came from military or civilian sources doesn't matter as much as its effectiveness in developing your skills. As Valentina continued her work at Riverside Flight Academy while contributing to military aviation training, she carried with her the knowledge that her combat experience had value beyond personal achievement. Her revelation as Phoenix had created opportunities to improve pilot training for both military personnel and civilian aviators. The successful integration of military and civilian flight training techniques became a model for aviation education programs throughout the country, with Valentina's role highlighting the capabilities that combat veterans brought to civilian aviation instruction. For Tommy and the many other students who had benefited from her instruction, she would always be remembered as a flight instructor who happened to be a legendary fighter pilot, someone whose dedication to teaching exceeded even her remarkable achievements in aerial combat. And for Colonel Valentina Phoenix Santos, the revelation of her military identity marked not the end of her civilian aviation career, but the beginning of a new phase where her complete experience could be used to benefit others who share the challenges of flying aircraft under demanding conditions, whether in combat zones or civilian airspace. The storm that had tested Tommy's skills during their memorable cross-country flight had also revealed that some instructors possessed capabilities that transcended the boundaries between military and civilian aviation, creating opportunities for training innovations that improve flight safety and competency in both communities. Her 47 air-to-air victories would always be part of aviation history, but her contributions to civilian flight training would create a lasting legacy that influenced thousands of pilots who learned that excellence in aviation required combining the best techniques from all sources, military and civilian alike.